Hey you, and welcome to my channel. My name is Tina and my aim is to improve your drawings just like others have done for me when I just started out. As you could tell by the thumbnail, the title and the intro, in this video I'm going to cover a tiger. For starters, I'm just going to block in my background in the top left corner. I'm doing this with a soft pastel stick from Jackson's. They are rather soft, a bit like the Unisons. Ideal to get down a solid color quickly and most importantly, very easy to blend. I advise to always add in your background first and then lay your subject on top. I'm just making sure I'm going a little bit over my line art to avoid gaps. Just make sure that you go lighter there so you don't completely remove your lines. Then I'm starting with my blocking in phase. I'm working on an A4 sheet of paper, so I'm just using pastel pencils for my underlayer. You could try to do this with soft pastels. This would be a little bit more cost effective, but I didn't think it's worth the hassle. By now you first saw me block in a rather dark underlayer for the ear. After this I used a bold red for my first layer of fur. I toned these back down by going over them with a more muted orange. And my last strokes were made with this bluish grey. I used these a bit to cover some fur on the side, but mostly for those hairs inside the ear. I started by blocking in where the black stripe is going to be, and then I moved over to the colors that are above it. I blend this out with a blending stump to give me a good control. You don't want to have some of that black mix with the light color above it. Since black is such a strong color, you'll have a hard time fixing that error. When it comes to blending, I'll either use my finger, a blending stump like the ones you see here, or a soft tool. Then I started with the red tone, a more yellow one on top, and even some ivory. Always work from dark to light when working with pastel. A small interruption, if you're not subscribed by now, you know where that button is, so go ahead and click it. You don't want to miss out on my future videos now, do you? Another thing you'll see me do is add that bright red between the orange and the black fur. This is because when you transfer between two colors very opposite of each other, in this case the black and bright orange, it's best to use a saturated color between them to give it a more realistic look. When it comes to the white fur, make sure you wait with the color white until you reach your top layer. In this case I used muted tones like warm grey and brown to build up my fur first. Moving over to the bottom part, I start by blocking in those blacks and then my next colors. The only exception here is that I don't mind having that black mix with some of my other colors. This is an area that's more in the shadow, so my light color doesn't need to be preserved. It's actually much nicer when you give this dirty look for your underlayer. Then I'm repeating the same steps I did earlier. I'll just use slightly darker colors instead. In between my layers you'll sometimes see me blend with my fingers. I do this to push the pastel more into the paper, this way I can add much more details later. So why did I choose for a solid background? Well, most of the time I'll go for a scene out of nature that matches the subject and I will blur the background so that my subject gets all of the attention. But here I'm drawing a tiger. These are without a doubt some of the most impressive animals out there. By framing them in this black background, you can literally feel the power this wildcat holds. I'll give you some small color theory about black to explain why this is the way it is. For one, it's the color of power, making black an incredibly strong and intimidating color that exudes authority. These are all traits you ascribe to a tiger as well. So because they have these in common with each other, by drawing the tiger in a plain black background, they reinforce each other. As a result, you put the emphasis on the power of the tiger. You remember that saturated color I used before to bring my two areas together? I did the same here, but instead of using that bright red color, I use a dark red to get the job done. While I'm blocking in the next part, I just want to talk about something I'm really proud of. I have a newsletter, so you'll find the link in the description below. I send out one newsletter each month, and included with that you'll receive 4 reference pictures you can use to create your own pieces. Some of the pictures I've already sent out include the following. Besides getting those reference pictures, you'll also be eligible to download my ebook, in which I give you 3 more tips to help you improve with your drawings. Not only will you get these tips, you'll also get examples and actionable steps you can take, so make sure you get your copy now. By now I'm first adding in the transitioning color before I switch it to a brownish orange tone. I'm adding this one in everywhere that my underlayer has a red, brown or orangey underlayer. Some of the darker areas I can immediately use a darker value as well. Just make sure that while you add these fur markings, you keep in mind that you follow the direction of the fur. Whichever animal and whatever fur you are drawing, if you don't follow the direction of the fur, you'll end up with something looking really goofy. With the tiger, you have an extra aid in the form of the black markings. They already give you quite a good indication of the curves. Otherwise, there's nothing more you can do than studying your reference picture. Also note the difference between the white fur around the eyebrow and the part on the left. The left side is in the shadowy area, so I'm building it up with cool colors, while the piece at the top is located in a light area and there I'm using very warm tones. I'm also adding some small black markings starting from the black and moving into the other colors. We want to add some black fur indications, but you don't want to go overboard with these. The eye is really small, so I'm not going to talk much about it. Just know that it's important to start with your black pupil. This way it has the darkest value it can be, and make sure you leave some blank paper where your highlight is going to be. I also want to apologize for the lighting. I drew most of this during the day and afterwards I did see it flickered quite a bit. Then it's back to the blocking in stages. I think I went quite bold here with my colors. At first this may seem quite daunting, but this is just one of those small details that will push your drawing to the next level. Also, a very important thing about your underlayer. You may have noticed this already, but when it comes to those colors, I always choose a very dark value for my underlayer. I'll try to explain why I do this. When I start with my darkest values, I can go lighter with layers on top. And I'll also have an easier time assessing my values. Maybe it makes more sense if I explain it this way. Let's say I start with a lighter value for the underlayer, then I will go over this with a darker value, and then I will have to go over this again with a light value. So by starting with the darkest value for my underlayer, I can skip this step. Then the rest is mostly a repeat of what I've done before. I'll adjust my colors where I need to. For instance, there is some dark brown in here that I didn't use before. Also pay very close attention to the length of your markings when you are working on the nose. The fur here switches up quite a lot, whether that's the curve to it or the length. For example, fur on the top of the nose is very short, so make sure you adjust your strokes to where you are working. Then the white is again very cold, so I'm using that bluish gray again. I'm going to build my first layer here in between the black, and afterwards I'm going to go over this with the ivory to whiten or lighten it up. The chin goes through the same process, with the exception that I add some olive green at the bottom there. I use the color picker tool to help me choose the colors, because otherwise the chances of me picking that color would have been very slim. So if you're after realism, I highly encourage you to use a color picker to help you out. I'm also not blocking in the underlayer for the entire piece in one go. I love this process of drawing for a few reasons. There's less risk of smudging any part of your drawing without having to think about this a lot. And secondly, and this is more a matter of personal taste, I like having progress pictures in where you can see your drawing grow, if that makes sense. And then the third reason, and maybe the biggest one for you watching this video, I think it's much easier to follow along as you don't become overwhelmed with the drawing as a whole. I actually uploaded a video where I cover this in more detail as one of my tips when working in pastel. So if you're eager to learn more, make sure you go and watch that video too. I'll have the link pop in the video, and you'll also find it in the description below. I also waited with blocking in the right side of my background till I got to that part of the tiger. Again, this way I wanted to avoid smudging too much of the pastel on my paper. I even left the far right side blank so I could still rest my hand there without a problem. Obviously, if you had a piece of glassine underneath your hand, this also would solve the problem. It's just a personal preference. The body is just like the bottom part of the head, located in a more shadowed area, so I use a dark shade of red and a combination of orange for this. Combine this with the black that blends a little bit when I blend this out, and you have the perfect tone. For the fur, again, just a repetition of what I've done so far. I'm just using more gray for the white before I go over this with ivory to give it a white shine. Then I'm adding in some stray black hairs to mute it back down a little bit. When it comes to the fur on the body, I've added in some indications of fur with the dark orange. What I mean by this is I don't actually want to put a lot of detailed fur there. This is in a darker area and it's also slightly out of focus, but you can't leave it as is. So I just added a little bit of fur markings randomly to give the illusion of fur. Then for my final stages, I'm just finishing my black background. going over my drawing one more time to add in some markings here and there and just tidying it up. And lastly, I'll put in my whiskers. I use a carandache pencil for this. Even though making a fine line is easier with a harder pencil, because there is already so much pastel on my paper, using a very soft pencil like the carandache ensures me that I'll get that line down on my paper. And then I finally have my end result. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate your support, as this helps to grow my channel and reach other people just like yourself. Hope to see you again next Friday, and in the meantime, have a great week.